Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I am going to be painting with these Liquitex inks. I bought these recently and I really wanted to give them a go and try them out and just see what I can create with them. Now I bought all of these individually and I picked these colors specifically for a reason, because I wanted to be able to mix multiple different colors, and for that I would need at least a set of primary colors. I also grabbed a white and a purple, mainly because I wanted the option to possibly have some opaque or maybe some highlights in there, as well as the fact that purple is a hard color to mix, especially with the traditional primary colors. So just having that nice purple color there really does help. So now it's time to give these guys a little bit of a swatchy watch. Of course, I love testing out my art supplies when I get them. Instead of just diving into an art project, I like to test the waters a little bit. And these colors are really nice and pigmented. I love how bright and vibrant they are and how vivid the colors look. And they mix really well with water as well, so you can get this really nice sort of watercolor effect, which you can see I'm actually testing out below. I'm doing a little bit of a wet on wet technique here, which I love to do with watercolor, and of course that's going to translate well with something like ink. And straight away I can tell that they behave quite a lot like watercolors. Now, why would I be using ink instead of just watercolor if they act pretty much the same? Well, there is one main reason, and that is because these inks are actually acrylic inks, and like acrylic paint, once dry they will be waterproof. So with that in mind, let's dive straight into making an artwork with these amazing new inks. So for the idea of this artwork, I wanted to try and go for something naturey. Here in the southern hemisphere, it is actually the start of spring, and yeah, I wanted to see if I could do some sort of artwork with lots of plants around the border and perhaps an animal in the middle. Now the paper I'm actually using at the moment is a nice sort of cold pressed watercolor paper. It is my go-to watercolor paper. I know the paint I'm using today isn't actually watercolor, but with the techniques I'm using, it is practically used the exact same way. Now I did sketch out my idea onto this paper, and I didn't actually film that because I felt like it wasn't very interesting. Also, it was very time consuming because I had to play around with the initial concept until I actually got something that I was happy with. And as you can see, I have erased that sketch pretty much to the point where it is barely visible, and that's because with this artwork I mainly want the ink to be the main thing that shows all of the details. That sketch is actually just for me to know where I should put each ink and you know, the stuff before I actually paint onto it, and at the end the sketch isn't really going to be visible. So as you can see, I actually have a nice layer of plants all around the border here. Now I just pretty much used a bit of green for that, and I used mostly yellow and a little bit of blue in that green. And I diluted that ink quite a bit because this is basically the first layer and I still want it to be quite light. I don't want to make it too deep just yet. With paints and inks like this, you really do want to try and work from light to dark, because it is a lot easier to add in shadows than it is to, you know, brighten and like make things lighter. Now what I'm actually painting today is a little fox with a bandana around his neck. I thought that this was a pretty cute sort of animal portrait opportunity, and it's been quite a while since I've done an animal portrait in the past, and I just really felt like drawing something cute and fuzzy. Now we're going into the bandana around his neck first, because that is one of the lightest parts of this illustration. Now with the colors I had, I wanted to mix a grey for the bandana, but as you can see, I don't actually have a black at the moment for these inks, and I really didn't want to sort of mix other inks in here. I kind of wanted the main thing of this artwork to be those inks. So of course I tried to mix a sort of neutral brown color, not too warm, not too cool, and when I had that, I mixed in a lot of white to dilute it, and that's basically what I used for the grey. And I actually really like this because it does add quite a bit of colour and warmth into this than just using straight grey, and I feel like it makes it look a little bit more natural as well. Now for the fox's legs, I did basically a very similar thing, except it is quite a bit more warm and it is a little bit more darker, and I'm basically just adding a little bit of a gradient onto the legs because, you know, foxes do have these sort of dark socks on their feet. For the bandana, I really wanted to have a bit of a gingham, sort of like a plaid sort of checkers texture on that bandana. Just something simple and cute, but stands out against all of the greenery of the border and later on the orange of the fox. It's also just a really simple and fun pattern that you can do with inks or watercolor. To do that pattern, you basically just do a whole lot of horizontal lines going in one direction, and after that is dry, you do vertical lines across. With that first layer, you do have to make sure that it is completely dry before you go over the top. That way you'll get that really nice sort of overlapping pattern when the lines sort of cross over each other. And now it's time to add some color onto our little foxy friend here, and I'm just adding in a very light pale yellow color, just a bit of a wash first before I introduce some of that sort of saturated orange ink. I actually mixed up two different tones of orange, as you can see, sort of lighter, more warm, yellowy kind of orange, and then after that I also mixed a sort of deeper, more saturated and red orange. And this is actually really convenient for me so that I can add in different tones into this, some bits where there's highlights and some bits where there's sort of more deeper reds. Just helps make it look a little bit more natural, as well as letting those colors, since I'm adding them at the same time, they're blending really nicely together with that wet on wet technique. Now with the white parts on the fox, I still wanted to keep this fairly warm. I didn't want to just use grey on the white parts of the fox, so I mixed up a very nice pale sort of beigey color. So after all of that was dry, I ended up mixing a nice sort of darker, richer, sort of warmer brownish reddish color, and I went in with my really thin sort of line art brush, and I added in some fur texture all over this little guy. The first layer was mainly to add in the base color as well as shadows and highlights, and this second layer is where I get to add in details and texture over the top. This part was really fun. It was a little bit more time consuming because I had to slowly add all of these little wavy lines all over the creature, but it was actually quite fun and therapeutic. Until I accidentally added a bit of a weird brown color onto the face there. That was a mistake that I ended up fixing later on with some layers of white over the top. I wish I didn't do that. It would have looked nicer with that sort of soft yellowy beigeish color all over, but I accidentally added those bits to the face and I had to fix it. I am quite glad that I did end up fixing that face because I really didn't want to do this artwork all over again, and I did want to wreck it, but I think it turned out alright. Now, as you can see, I'm adding in more detail into that border. We had that light green sort of wash all over the leaves, but now, as you know, as I did with the fox, I'm adding in those details over the top. I mixed a nice dark green with those inks with no water to dilute them so that it was nice and deep, and then I went into that greenery and added in some nice texture, outlines, details, and of course a little bit of shading. I'm not going too crazy with the border though, because I really don't want to detract too much from the fox. I want the fox to be the main sort of, you know, focus of the illustration. I want that border to nicely complement him. Now, first impressions of these inks, actually pretty good. Now, I do have something that I need to admit. I have used these inks technically before, but I have a set of metallics of these guys. You've probably seen them in a few of my previous videos. I have a nice little set of gold, silver, and copper of these inks. But those do work a little bit differently. They're sort of a more clear ink with, you know, little gold fragments floating around through. So it is quite a bit different to actually using the, you know, main colors of these inks. The colors are actually really nice, super vibrant, and easy to mix with. The colors do feel quite a bit like watercolor when you're using them, but it's really convenient that you have them in a liquid form as well as a nice dropper on the bottle. That is a really nice and convenient touch. Also, since these guys are pretty much permanent once dry, you can layer them up so much more than watercolors, and you don't have to worry about reactivating that paint underneath. Although that does come with a bit of a drawback, being that you can't go back in and reblend stuff like you can with watercolor. But I guess if you wanted to do that, you just go with watercolor instead of ink. But anyways, for the final details of this artwork, I did end up having to go in with a brush pen, just with a tiny bit of black, just to add in a little few details here and there, just because I didn't have a proper black ink. Just for things like the facial features of this fox, the whiskers, the eyes, nose, mouth, as well as subtle outlines around some parts of the illustration that needed a little bit more focus. So here's the final results, and I really love this painting. It's been quite a while since I've done a sort of watercolor style artwork, and I feel a little bit rusty in this style, but I actually really like the results and I hope you guys like it too. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please smash like and subscribe to get your scribble fix in the future, and I hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye everyone.